Look who crawled out of the toolbox. My poor ex. So this is the famous Dorian. Babe, he is exactly how you described him. Still broke, Dorian. Still alone after all these years. I'm married, Vanessa. Sure you are. The group chat says hello. So where is this wife of yours? Somewhere in your imagination. Here, sweetheart. $20 for the parking meter. Valet costs more than that. She's on her way. Of course she is. Married to who, exactly? A ghost? Everybody raise your glasses. A toast to my ex-husband, Dorian Whitaker. Proof that some men peak young and spend the rest of their lives pretending they didn't. Sorry I'm late, baby. Is that Camille Whitaker? Have you ever watched someone celebrate their own downfall without realizing it? To understand how that ballroom went from laughter to silence, you have to go back to the quiet life Dorian Whitaker had built while almost nobody from his old world was paying attention. Before the reunion, Dorian sat in his work truck on Lakeshore Drive with a cup of coffee cooling beside him and the biggest secret in Chicago resting quietly on his phone. The message came from his attorney. All signatures are in. Congratulations. A long negotiation had finally ended. A national infrastructure fund had completed the purchase of a minority stake in Whitaker Infrastructure Group. The company Dorian had built from one borrowed pickup truck and a set of his grandfather's framing tools had just been valued at $2.1 billion. Dorian still owned most of it, which meant a 50-year-old black man from the South Side, sitting in a dusty work truck at a red light, had quietly become a billionaire. The only person he told was his wife. The public announcement had not gone out yet. The lawyers wanted silence. Dorian preferred it that way. I had spent decades learning something every good builder eventually learns. The loudest thing on a job site is often the thing closest to failing. The reunion invitation had been sitting on his phone for weeks. His oldest friend, Tessa Hart, had been pushing him to attend. She had known him since high school and still spoke to him in the same no-nonsense voice. You've spent years rebuilding your life in silence, Dorian. Go to the reunion. Not to prove anything, just close the door properly. I had nearly refused. Years earlier, Vanessa had walked out of their modest South Side home, carrying 2 suitcases and wearing an expression that told Dorian she had left emotionally, long before she packed. I did not chase her down the street. I did not call her relatives begging for another chance. He let her go. Then he went quiet. Some people mistake quiet for broken. They have never been the same thing. Dorian rebuilt his life the way he built everything else, one honest day at a time. No audience, no speeches, no revenge. His company grew from repairing porches and small commercial jobs to pouring bridge decks, rebuilding public infrastructure, and managing projects large enough to change a skyline. I eventually bought a home in the Gold Coast. The porch light was almost always on. And then there was Camille. Camille Whitaker ran an education foundation that invested in schools across Chicago's South and West Sides. She cared about that work more than any gala, photograph, or wealthy donor ever would. She met Dorian at a community fundraiser. The cameras had left. The important guests had left. The caterers were packing up. Camille looked across the room and saw a man in a good jacket staying behind to help an elderly custodian stack folding chairs. She would later joke that she married the chair stacking. Everything else about Dorian was a bonus. Camille was one of the first people he thought about whenever life slowed down enough to let his mind wander. The other was his grandmother, Odessa Whitaker. Odessa had raised him on a porch on 79th Street in a rocking chair that seemed older than the neighborhood itself. She had one sentence she polished like silver. Baby, the folks who talk the loudest about your failures are usually the ones most afraid you're about to prove them wrong. Odessa never lived to see Whitaker Infrastructure outgrow its first warehouse. Dorian wore his father's plain steel watch every day and carried his grandmother's words where other men carry anger. So when reunion night arrived, he chose a simple charcoal suit. No flash, no statement. Camille had a foundation board meeting that was running late. She told him to go ahead and promised she would join him. The hotel lobby smelled like fresh flowers and expensive coffee. A jazz trio played something low near the elevators. Rain softened the city lights outside. In the elevator mirror, Dorian straightened his jacket and took one slow breath. Not to prove anything, he reminded himself. Just close the door. Then the elevator opened into chandeliers, low jazz, name tags, and old ghosts. A ballroom full of people, who had not seen one another in decades, was doing what reunions often do. Quietly sorting everyone into winners and losers. Who looked successful, who looked tired, who had money, who had gained weight, who had married well, who had not. And the first voice Dorian heard belonged to the woman who had once known exactly how to make a room turn toward her. Vanessa Crowell. She had already seen him. Vanessa did not know about the truck, the fund, the attorney's message, the company valuation, or the announcement that had not yet gone public. She lifted her champagne toward a circle of old classmates and began what would become the most expensive performance of her life. Vanessa had not exactly changed. She had upgraded. The dress was newer. The diamonds were louder. The laugh had been practiced in better rooms. But the instinct beneath it was the same one Dorian had lived beside during their marriage. Find the softest person in the room. Stand on them until you feel taller. And in a ballroom like this one, a wealthy white woman aiming that instinct at the quiet black man near the back table could still count on people laughing before they stopped to ask why. Oh my God, everybody. Look who crawled out of the toolbox. Her voice traveled across the room. Heads turned. Name tags swiveled. A circle formed around her. Half friends, half witnesses. Gold balloons hung near a screen, showing old yearbook photographs. A disc jockey waited beside the dance floor. Hundreds of former classmates watched people they barely knew anymore and pretended none of them were keeping score. Vanessa pointed toward Dorian. My poor ex. Still broke. Still a nobody after all these years. Dorian set down his ice water and stood because Odessa had raised him to stand when someone approached, even when the person approaching felt like weather. Vanessa, he said. You look well. I look expensive, she corrected. The circle laughed. There's a difference. You wouldn't know it. The man beside her was tall, white, polished from haircut to shoes, and wearing a suit that looked more expensive than comfortable. Vanessa's new husband. His name was Blake Carver. Dorian knew almost nothing about him. What Dorian noticed first was not Blake's face. It was his eyes. They dropped to the plain steel watch on Dorian's wrist, the one his father had worn. Blake was not admiring it. How was measuring? The way a pawnbroker measures. The way a man looks at a number he does not want anyone to know he is calculating. Blake, baby, film this, Vanessa said. The group chat has been asking about him forever. Blake raised his phone sideways. Say hello, buddy, you're famous tonight. Dorian looked into the lens the way he looked at concrete pours and payroll audits. Calm, thorough, unbothered. A few classmates shifted behind Vanessa. One woman with sharp eyes and folded arms did not laugh. Meredith Sloan. In high school, Meredith had been the student who told you the truth about your science project when everyone else said it looked great. Now she worked in municipal vendor compliance. Her job was noticing details people hoped would stay unnoticed. Vanessa stepped closer. Her perfume reached Dorian before her hand did. She folded a $20 bill, slid it into his breast pocket, then patted it twice. Slowly. For the parking meter, sweetheart. I know valet costs $30. The circle howled. Someone whistled. A man, Dorian did not recognize, called out that he had once talked about building something big. Guess all that's left is the ego and a tool belt. Dorian did not touch the bill. I let it remain in his pocket like evidence. Several people laughed harder. One woman lowered her phone and did not raise it again. Rooms often change one person at a time, long before anyone notices the room has changed. I'm married, Vanessa, Dorian said. For 1 second, the people around her went silent. Then Vanessa laughed. Big. Performative. Designed to convince the audience before it convinced herself. Married? Everybody hear that? Dorian says he's married. She turned slowly, gathering attention like a conductor gathering an orchestra. A man who couldn't build a stable life suddenly has a wife none of us have ever heard of. An imaginary wife. Did you invent an entire woman so you wouldn't look lonely? Where is she, Dorian? Does she live in your head with all those big plans you used to talk about? Dorian answered evenly. We've been married for years. She's on her way. Sure she is. Vanessa waved a hand. Still poor. Still alone. And now inventing a marriage. That's almost sad. Almost. Dorian let the words land and pass through him. Anger is a poor tenant. Leave it in the house long enough, and it stops paying rent and starts tearing up the walls. I had learned that the hard way, and Vanessa's voice pulled him toward memories he had spent years learning not to live inside. He remembered being a much younger man, standing outside a downtown conference center in hard rain. Vanessa had wanted a certification program badly. Dorian had sold his grandfather's framing tools to pay the enrollment fee. The good steel tools, the ones that had helped him survive his first construction jobs. He never told Vanessa where the money came from. I did not need gratitude. I wanted her to have a chance. When Vanessa finally left the conference center and found him soaked through, she did not thank him. She looked at him like he was an embarrassing stain on the evening. Why do you look so pathetic right now? Dorian said nothing. He said nothing through too much of their marriage. At the time, he thought silence was patience. I understood the difference now. There had been other sacrifices, double shifts on a warehouse renovation, so he could pay for a family wedding gift Vanessa wanted to give. A long drive to repair one of her relatives' water heaters for free, because, as Vanessa said, it made the family look good. He came home to a cold dinner and a closed bedroom door. None of those choices had felt like sacrifice while he was making them. They felt like love. That was the only language of love he knew then. A man can pour his whole heart into a cup someone else has already decided not to drink from. It took Dorian years to understand that. It took Vanessa leaving, and later, it took months of searching to find the man who had bought Odessa's husband's old framing tools after Dorian sold them. Dorian paid several times what they were worth to bring them home. Those tools now sat inside a glass case in the lobby of Whitaker Infrastructure Group. A small brass plate beneath them carried only 2 words. Start here. Vanessa knew none of that. She was still performing. You know what the saddest part is? She said. You actually thought you'd amount to something. All that talk back in school about building something real. And look at you. Same tired suit. Same tired face. Some men just don't have it in them. Blake leaned toward her and murmured something. His eyes returned to Dorian's steel watch. Quick. Calculating. Vanessa did not notice. She was too busy searching the circle for another laugh. My wife had a late meeting downtown, Dorian said. She'll be here. Sure she will. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Across the room, Meredith caught Dorian's gaze. She did not smile. She gave him the smallest nod. The kind that says, I see this. And I have seen more than this. Some of it has paperwork. You should slow down, Dorian told Vanessa. I was not threatening her. He sounded almost gentle. You're about to say something you can't take back. For a moment, uncertainty touched Vanessa's eyes. Then, the performance covered it again. She pulled Blake half a step forward like a prize she wanted everyone to admire. Slow down? I have nothing to slow down for. I have my life together. I have Blake. And you have what? A tool belt and an imaginary wife? Vanessa lifted her glass beneath the chandeliers. Everybody. A toast to Dorian Whitaker. Proof that some men peak young and spend the rest of their lives apologizing for it. The circle drank. Blake recorded the whole thing. The toast. The laughter. The folded $20 bill, still sitting inside Dorian's breast pocket. The calm black man lifting his glass of ice water barely an inch to absolutely no one. Then, the ballroom doors opened. Half the room turned. Vanessa was still laughing. She was so certain the ground beneath her was solid. It was only the dessert cart. Hotel staff rolled in a tower of chocolate pastries. Vanessa shaded her eyes dramatically. Oh, look! Is that her? Is that the wife? No. Just cake. Tragic, Dorian. She almost became real. Another burst of laughter moved through the group. Dorian checked his father's watch without hurry. Camille's meeting had run long. She was probably on her way. The clock on Vanessa's performance was already moving. She simply could not hear it. Then Vanessa noticed the microphone near the disc jockey. The disc jockey did not stand a chance. She crossed the ballroom, held out one hand with the confidence of a woman who had rarely been denied anything in public, and took the microphone. She tapped it. The sound rolled through the ballroom. Testing. Hi, everybody. Quick addition to the program. Her smile moved across the room. The reunion committee gave out awards. Most successful. Furthest traveled. Cutest couple. But they missed one. She waited. Hundreds of faces turned toward her. Some grinning. Some already uncomfortable. All watching. That is the terrible physics of a microphone. It turns people who would rather be witnesses into an audience. The most unchanged award, Vanessa announced, goes to my ex-husband, Dorian Whitaker. Scattered laughter followed. A confused spotlight operator swung a beam toward the back tables and found Dorian sitting quietly with his ice water. Same face, Vanessa continued. Same haircut. Same bargain store watch. And believe me, I know the watch. I lived beside it for years. Blake called from the crowd. Same watch for sure. Vanessa pointed toward him. Exactly. After all these years, this man hasn't changed one thing except the address where he keeps his tool belt. She was not finished. Vanessa pulled a cocktail napkin from Blake's pocket and pretended to read from it, even though everyone could see the napkin was blank. A brief career retrospective. High school. Dorian says he'll build skyscrapers. Later, Dorian says he'll own a company. Now, she looked toward him and stretched the pause. Dorian owns a ladder. Some people laughed. Not everyone. Near the bar, a former athlete stared into his drink. Two women exchanged the kind of glance that silently files a report. Meredith Sloan no longer bothered pretending any of this was funny. Dorian remained still. He let the mockery fall around him, and while it did, Odessa's rocking chair moved through his memory. Baby, the folks who talk the loudest about your failures are usually the ones most afraid you're about to prove them wrong. Odessa was gone. The sentence had never aged. There is a special exhaustion that comes from being underestimated by the same person for so long that the insult stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like weather. Something you live under instead of something you fight. Dorian had stopped fighting Vanessa's weather, not because he had given up, because he found a better place to spend the energy. That place had cranes on it. At home, inside the bottom drawer of an old desk, sat a notebook that knew many of the sentences Vanessa had used against him over the years. I had not opened it in a long time. He did not yet know he would think about that notebook again before the night was over. Tessa Hart arrived at his table like a sudden change in temperature. Dorian Whitaker, I swear on my mother's cornbread. Say the word and I will unplug that microphone. Let her finish. Finish? She's doing an encore. Tessa dropped into the chair beside him. I told you to come close the door, not stand there while she slams it on your fingers for entertainment. You told me to close it properly. Dorian turned his glass slowly on the tablecloth. Properly takes a minute. Tessa leaned closer. Does she know about the company deal? Nobody knows until the announcement. Tessa looked across the ballroom toward Vanessa. The woman is tap dancing on a landmine, and she brought a microphone. She studied Dorian's face. Whatever she saw made her stop arguing. Later, Tessa would say that was the moment she understood. Not because Dorian looked like a man about to win, because he looked like a man who already had and was politely waiting for everyone else to catch up. Across the ballroom, Blake Carver stepped away from Vanessa's circle and bent over his phone. I was no longer filming. I was typing quickly. The speed of a man trying to manage damage before anybody had admitted damage existed. Meredith drifted closer to him at the bar. She ordered a club soda. Doyle Consulting, right? She asked casually. Blake's thumbs stopped. Do I know you? Meredith Sloan. Municipal Vendor Compliance Audits. Your firm's name has a strange habit of appearing in my files, then disappearing. That's unusual. Paperwork is rarely shy. Blake's face went through several emotions before landing on a smile with sweat behind it. You must be thinking of somebody else. That's possible, Meredith said. She held his eyes. I'm very rarely thinking of somebody else. Then she walked away. Blake searched her name on his phone. Whatever appeared on the screen made him set down his champagne. He deleted messages, typed another, deleted that too. Then he returned to Vanessa. Why do you care this much about your ex? He murmured. He's nobody. Vanessa did not even turn toward him. Because every room needs a loser, baby. You pick one, or you become one. First rule of every party I've ever survived. Blake laughed, half a beat late. It did not reach his eyes. Men who make careers out of reading rooms know when a floor has started giving notice. Vanessa handed the microphone back to the disc jockey and returned to Dorian. A performer always returns to the seat that gave her the best reaction. Okay, I'll be nice. Let's give him a chance. The wife. The famous invisible wife. She opened one palm toward the circle. Show us a picture. Every married man has pictures. Show us one. Dorian's phone was lying beside his water. Before he could move, Vanessa snatched it. She lit the lock screen. The photograph showed a bridge. Steel arches over gray water at dawn. Taken from a work barge. The first major bridge span his company had ever repaired. Vanessa held the phone above her head. A bridge, everybody. He's married to a bridge. The circle exploded again. Vanessa wiped a tear from laughing, then handed the phone back with 2 fingers. After all these years, and the most romantic thing in your life is public infrastructure. Careful, Vanessa, Dorian said. I took the phone gently. You're going to want to remember tonight in the correct order. What is that supposed to mean? Dorian did not answer. I did not have to. The jazz trio softened. The double doors opened again. This time there was no dessert cart. A hush began near the entrance and moved inward, like water finding its level. Someone near the bar whispered, "Wait! Is that Camille Whitaker? The woman who runs the Education Foundation for the South and West Side schools?" Vanessa turned. Her smile was still on her face. It would never fit quite the same way again. Camille Whitaker entered the ballroom without needing to announce herself. She wore deep midnight blue. Her dark curls were swept up. A striking black woman moving through gold light with the calm certainty of someone who had never needed a room's permission to belong there. Heads turned in a slow wave. Whispers moved faster than Camille did. "That's Camille Whitaker. She spoke at my niece's school. What is she doing at our reunion?" Vanessa watched Camille cross the marble. Straight past the stage, straight past the important tables, straight toward the quiet man with a folded $20 bill in his breast pocket. Camille reached Dorian, took his hand in both of hers, then kissed his cheek in front of everyone. "Sorry I'm late, baby." The word baby moved through the circle like a quiet explosion. A champagne glass stopped halfway to someone's mouth. The man who had joked about the tool belt suddenly found the carpet fascinating. Camille leaned close enough that only Dorian could hear her next words. "Tessa texted me what was happening, so I took my time coming in." Then her expression shifted. "One more thing. The fund's press office called. The announcement is going public sooner than expected." Dorian felt the news settle quietly inside his chest. Soon, everyone in that ballroom would open a phone and see his name attached to a number with 10 figures. This was the last stretch of his life, as a rumor to people like Vanessa. And while he watched his ex-wife's face begin doing slow arithmetic, Dorian realized he was not in a hurry. Vanessa recovered first, or tried. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice came out too high. "You're his wife?" Camille turned toward her, warm as a porch light, completely unbothered. "I am, and I'm very proud of my husband." Dorian's wife. Not imaginary, not invented, standing in a ballroom that had spent much of the evening laughing at her supposed non-existence. Here is the truth. Dorian would understand more clearly later. Vanessa's cruelty had never really been about him. It had been insurance. For years, she had carried one fear since the divorce. The fear that leaving a loyal man for a shinier life might have been the worst decision she ever made. Mocking Dorian in front of people who remembered their marriage was not confidence. It was a performance for an audience of one. Vanessa herself. Camille walking through those doors was not simply a surprise guest. She was Vanessa's fear arriving in person. "Well," Vanessa said. She manufactured a laugh that came out thin. "That's wonderful. I had no idea Dorian had someone like you. Most people don't take the time to find out what somebody actually has," Camille replied. There was no malice in her voice. That made the sentence land harder. Vanessa glanced at Dorian, then Camille. then reached for higher ground, the way she always had. How did you two even meet? Because Dorian isn't exactly. I mean, no offense, but you're you, and he's. How is stacking chairs, Camille said. Her face softened at the memory. At a fundraiser. The cameras left. The caterers were leaving. Everybody important had already decided the evening was over, and there was one man in a good jacket helping an elderly custodian carry folding chairs into a supply closet. I asked around about him. Nobody knew his name. Camille looked at her husband. I decided to learn it. Vanessa's smile struggled. Sweet. Blake stepped forward. His phone was finally lowered. So what do you do these days, Dorian? Still construction. I run a construction and infrastructure company. We closed a deal recently. Dorian did not give him the number. I did not need to. Some truths do not need volume. They only need time. Blake had spent the evening measuring a steel watch, and men who measure for a living know when a number refuses to fit the frame. He leaned toward Vanessa and murmured something he would later wish he had swallowed. You never told me he actually had money. Vanessa shot him a look sharp enough to cut. Too late. Dorian heard it. Camille heard it. Meredith Sloan heard it from across the room. And for the first time that evening, Meredith allowed herself a small, patient smile. Because Meredith had been sitting on paperwork for a long time. She had been waiting to understand whether this was the night it mattered. It was. Meredith crossed the ballroom without asking permission. Vanessa, she said clearly. That's enough. Vanessa blinked. Meredith, this doesn't concern you. Actually, it does. Meredith's arms remained folded. Her voice stayed level. Some of us have known for years what kind of man Dorian is. And I've watched you spend an entire evening and a microphone pretending otherwise. The ballroom went quiet. What most people here don't know, Meredith continued, is that for years Dorian Whitaker has personally funded the scholarship endowment at our old high school. Every scholarship student you people clap for at alumni events. That's him. No publicity. No name on the fund. Not even thank you cards because he asked the school not to send them. I found out by accident while reviewing compliance paperwork. He asked me to keep it quiet. Meredith paused. I'm done keeping it quiet. A ripple moved through the ballroom. Someone near the stage whispered. That was Dorian this whole time. The question spread from table to table. A woman who had filmed Vanessa, putting the $20 bill into Dorian's pocket, lowered her phone and looked ashamed. Dorian felt something tighten and loosen in his chest at once. He remembered the first scholarship check, written alone at his kitchen table. He had always told himself his name did not need to be attached for the money to matter. If he had ever imagined this secret becoming public, he thought he would feel proud. Instead, he felt exposed, like a locked door had been opened by a locksmith he trusted. Dorian did not reach for credit. He simply held Camille's hand and let the truth move around the room on its own legs. Vanessa had gone pale. For once, no comeback arrived. Meredith was not finished. She turned toward Blake. And you may want to stay very quiet for the next part. Because I know exactly what you tried to do to Dorian's company. The falsified subcontractor bid. Shell paperwork routed through a fake vendor account. An attempt to skim money from a city project. It failed because Dorian's team caught it during intake and shut it down before public funds were touched. Meredith held Blake's gaze. I audited that file. Your fingerprints are all over the vendor account. And I've wondered for a long time about one thing. Then she looked at Vanessa. You knew, didn't you? You covered for him. The color left Vanessa's face. She turned toward Blake. You told me that was a misunderstanding. You said the paperwork was mixed up. You said. Don't, Blake said. He stepped away from her. Not much. Just enough for everyone to see him creating distance in real time. Don't make this about me. His grip tightened around the champagne glass. The smooth confidence disappeared from his face. Underneath. It was the same calculating expression Dorian had noticed when Blake studied his watch. A man running numbers on an exit. Not an apology. Someone, near the punch table, murmured that they had always wondered how Blake afforded his lifestyle on consulting fees. Word travels quickly once a room decides to stop protecting politeness. Tessa arrived at Dorian's side. She watched Vanessa, the way someone watches weather they predicted, and nobody believed. I told you closing the door properly might take the hinges with it. Dorian nearly laughed. Nearly. Vanessa turned in a slow circle, searching the faces that had laughed at her jokes, raised glasses for her toast, fed her performance all evening. Now those same people were suddenly interested in the bar. Their shoes. The slideshow. Anything except Vanessa. The circle that had orbited her for decades drifted apart table by table. A crowd is loyal to a show, not necessarily to the person giving it. The show was over, and the man, Vanessa, had spent the night presenting as a failure, stood quietly at the center of what replaced it. The folded $20 was still inside his pocket. Dorian found himself thinking about mercy. Vanessa turned back to him. The arrogance finally cracked. What remained beneath it looked like desperation wearing expensive makeup. You knew. Her voice shook. About Blake. About the bid against your company. And you never said anything? Not to me? Not to anybody? Dorian's voice remained steady. My legal team caught it during intake. We handled it without turning it into a spectacle. I don't build spectacles, Vanessa. I build everything else. She stared at him. Maybe for the first time in years, she was actually seeing him. Why didn't you ever tell me? Camille answered before he could. There is something else you should know, Vanessa. Dorian knew about you and Blake, long before the divorce was filed. The ballroom became so still that a cube of ice shifting in a glass sounded loud. Vanessa's eyes widened, then filled. You knew? I knew, Dorian said. The words came out simple, no anger attached. Then why didn't you say anything? Why did you just let it happen? Dorian looked at her. For a long time. I thought if I stayed quiet enough and worked hard enough, you would eventually choose me on your own. I didn't want to force it. I wanted you to see me. He paused. You never did. Eventually, I stopped needing you to. Vanessa turned toward Blake. Her voice lost every trace of performance. You told me you'd give me the life Dorian never could. You said I would never have to worry again. I lied for you. I told my family the condo was legitimate. I told everybody in this room tonight that you were the better choice. What happened to all that? Blake straightened his jacket. His mind was already halfway out of the hotel. That sounds like your problem, Vanessa. He placed his glass on a passing tray, then walked out without looking back. The crowd parted, not from respect, from instinct. The way people move aside for an ambulance. Somebody behind. Dorian whispered, Lord have mercy. Dorian looked at Vanessa, standing alone inside the wreckage of her own evening. In front of people she had spent most of her life trying to impress, and he felt something unexpected. Not sweetness, not revenge, not triumph, just stillness, like a door, easing closed under its own weight. Dorian turned toward Camille. Without saying anything, they started toward the ballroom doors. Behind them, Vanessa called his name one more time. Thin now. All the performance gone. Dorian, wait. Please. Just wait. I did not turn around. The rest became public soon enough. The company announcement went out. Former classmates opened their phones and saw the same headline. South Side Builder becomes Chicago's newest billionaire. Whitaker Infrastructure Group valued at $2.1 billion in landmark deal. The photograph showed Dorian in a plain charcoal suit, his father's steel watch on his wrist, the same face Vanessa had called tired in the ballroom. The class group chat went silent. Then somebody posted Blake's video of Vanessa's toast. Someone else placed the company headline beside it. Mockery and mathematics on the same screen. The video spread beyond the group chat. Soon strangers were watching Vanessa slide $20 into the pocket of a man whose company was worth billions. The $20 bill became a national joke. Not the joke Vanessa intended. People began mailing $20 bills to Whitaker Infrastructure Group as a gesture of support. Dorian had his office donate every one of them to the high school lunch fund. No statement. No victory lap. The reunion committee mailed Dorian a formal apology on embossed stationery. He wrote back only a few words. No apology needed. The chicken was excellent. Meredith Sloan spent her next workday differently. She brought the old audit file to the city inspector general, placed it beside records from Dorian's legal team. Then let paperwork do what paperwork does. The investigation into Blake Carver's consulting firm took time. Eventually, the evidence turned into charges, falsified bids, a shell vendor account. an attempt to skim money from a public project. Blake had spent his life reading rooms. He finally misread one with a judge in it. Had lost clients, his municipal contracting privileges, his condo, his freedom for a while. The expensive suit still did not fit. Reporters eventually found Meredith. They asked why she had held the file for so long. Her answer became famous inside compliance offices. "Evidence is patient," she said. "So am I." Vanessa was not charged with a crime. There was nothing to charge. Believing a husband's lie and protecting his story in social circles is not necessarily a crime. It is a choice. And choices write consequences in their own language. The circle Vanessa had spent years ruling slowly disappeared. People stopped calling. Some because they were ashamed. Some because they were afraid of being associated with the embarrassment. Some simply because crowds often move away from the person they once encouraged. The scholarship fund became public too. School leaders asked whether they could finally put Dorian's name on it. He said no, the same way he always had. Then he offered a compromise. That is why a small bronze plaque now hangs above the trophy case at their old high school. It does not say Whitaker. It says Odessa's Kids. Named for a woman who sat on a South Side porch in a creaking rocking chair and never lived to see the billion-dollar company. The ballroom, the headline, or the school plaque. But somehow, she had seen the shape of all of it long before Dorian did. The folks who talk the loudest about your failures are usually the ones most afraid you're about to prove them wrong. Proof had simply taken the long way home. But the part Dorian remembered most clearly was not the headline, not the investigation, not the internet. It was the drive home. He and Camille rode along Michigan Avenue while storefronts glowed against wet pavement. A bakery closed for the night. A doorman checked his phone. Traffic moved. Chicago continued being Chicago. There is something grounding about a city that keeps moving, no matter what has fallen apart or come together inside one ballroom. Camille rested one hand lightly on Dorian's arm. "You never told me the whole story," she said. About knowing Vanessa was seeing Blake. About the notebook. Dorian looked over. "What notebook?" "The one in the bottom drawer of your old desk." Camille's voice was gentle. "I found it while cleaning the study. Pages of things Vanessa used to say to you. Every insult written down like you were keeping records. I never asked because I wasn't angry. I just didn't understand it. Not until tonight." Dorian kept his eyes on the road for a moment. "I wasn't keeping it to use against her. I kept it so I wouldn't forget who I used to let define me." He breathed out slowly. "Whenever I thought about giving up on myself, I'd read a page. Not because I wanted the pain again. Because I needed the reminder. Never again." Camille looked at him. "You could throw it away now." Dorian was quiet. "I think I finally can." His phone buzzed in the cup holder. A number he had never saved. One he recognized immediately. The message was short. "I'm sorry for tonight." "For more than tonight." Dorian stared at it. Camille did not reach for the phone. "You don't have to answer that now," she said. "Or ever." "I know." Dorian turned the phone face down. "Some doors do not need to be slammed. Sometimes you can let them close on their own weight. That is an answer, too." At home, the porch light was on. Camille always left it warm against the dark. She put on the kettle, the way she always did, whether either of them wanted tea or not. It had never really been about tea. It was about a few quiet minutes at the end of the day. A kitchen, a familiar table, nothing left to prove. Dorian sat at the worn oak table they had bought second-hand when they were building their life together. A water ring marked one corner. Camille insisted it gave the table character. Dorian thought about the younger man he used to be. The one sitting at a much smaller South Side table, doing late-night math on one paycheck, trying to figure out how to survive, how to keep the lights on, how to be enough for someone who had already decided he was not. That younger man would never have believed this kitchen. The strange part was that Dorian had not reached it through one dramatic victory. He reached it by continuing to show up, one ordinary day after another, until the life became real enough to sit inside. Later, Dorian and Camille stood on the back porch with coffee cooling in their hands while wind moved through the trees. Camille asked the question quietly. "Do you hate her?" Dorian smiled. Small. Real. "No. I forgave Vanessa a long time ago. What I hadn't forgiven until tonight was the version of myself who believed I had to earn the right to be loved. He shook his head. I don't owe anybody proof anymore. Not her. Not that ballroom. Not even myself. Then Dorian opened the bottom drawer of the old desk. I took out the notebook. I did not read a single page. Instead, he opened the cover, placed one last thing inside. The folded $20 bill Vanessa had tucked into his charcoal suit pocket. Then he slid the notebook into an envelope his office used for donations to Odessa's kids. The most expensive $20 Vanessa Crowell had ever spent. Not because it cost her money, because it became the final object Dorian needed to stop carrying. Some chapters do not need a dramatic ending. They only need you to stop turning around to reread them. And maybe that is the real lesson of Dorian Whitaker's story. The headline is satisfying. The billionaire reveal is satisfying. Watching a cruel joke collapse under the weight of truth is satisfying. But those things are not where Dorian actually won. He had already won before he entered the ballroom. He won when he stopped chasing someone who had decided not to see him. He won when he built a life without needing Vanessa to regret leaving. He won when he married a woman who noticed how he treated a custodian after the cameras were gone. He won when he funded students without putting his name on the checks. He won every ordinary morning he got out of bed and built something honest while nobody from his old life was watching. That matters because most of us will never get a ballroom reveal. There may never be a billionaire headline, no dramatic entrance, no room full of people suddenly realizing they were wrong. Sometimes the people who underestimated us never find out. Sometimes they never apologize. Sometimes they keep their version of the story forever. If your peace depends on their correction, they still have too much control over your life. Dorian's story shows another way. Build anyway. Heal anyway. Love anyway. Do good work anyway. Let your life become something solid enough that another person's opinion cannot knock it down. That does not mean staying silent in every situation. There are moments when speaking is necessary, especially when silence would allow harm to continue. What changed in Dorian was not that he became passive, he became deliberate. He learned to ask whether a response would build something or only satisfy a wounded moment. At the reunion, he could have interrupted Vanessa with bank statements, contracts, photographs, and headlines that had not even been published yet. He had the proof in his pocket, on his phone, and in the life waiting outside that ballroom. But none of it would have changed the person he had become. He chose not to turn his success into a weapon. That choice also gave everyone else room to reveal themselves. Vanessa kept talking. Blake kept calculating. Meredith kept watching. Camille arrived without needing to perform. The room slowly learned who each person was through behavior, rather than through Dorian's accusations. There is something powerful about that. When we are secure enough to stop controlling every misunderstanding, people often show us more truth than we could have forced out of them. At the same time, calm should never be confused with accepting abuse forever. Dorian had already left that part of his life behind. He was no longer trapped inside the old marriage, hoping patience alone would make somebody kinder. He had boundaries now. A loving home, honest work, friends who knew him, a wife who saw him clearly. His calm came from having somewhere healthy to return to. That is an important difference. Peace is not standing still while someone tears you down. Peace is knowing you do not have to tear yourself apart just because someone else is trying to provoke you. Dorian learned that too. For years he confused silence with patience inside his marriage. There is a difference between choosing calm and disappearing inside someone else's needs. There is a difference between humility and accepting disrespect. There is a difference between forgiveness and volunteering to be hurt again. Real kindness includes responsibility, including responsibility toward yourself. Dorian eventually learned that love should not require him to become smaller. Camille did not love him because the company became worth billions. She loved the man who stacked chairs when nobody important was watching. That may be one of the warmest truths in this entire story. The right people do not need a headline to recognize character. They watch what you do when the spotlight leaves. They notice how you speak to people who cannot advance your career. They notice whether you keep your word, whether you help without being asked, whether your success makes you kinder or simply louder. Meredith's part of the story matters for the same reason. She saw something wrong and kept evidence. Then, when the right moment came, she spoke with facts rather than gossip. Her courage was not dramatic. It was patient, careful, responsible, and because she chose truth over convenience. A fraudulent scheme that might have harmed public money eventually had consequences. Choices matter. Vanessa made choices. Blake made choices. Dorian made choices. Camille made choices. Meredith made choices. None of them were defined by one sentence in one ballroom. They were revealed by patterns. That is usually how character works, not one grand gesture. Repeated decisions. Vanessa's deepest mistake was not that she failed to predict Dorian would become wealthy. Respect should never depend on whether the person you are mocking might secretly be rich. Dorian deserved dignity when he was struggling. He deserved dignity when he was selling tools to support his wife. He deserved dignity when he drove a work truck. He deserved dignity before anybody knew his company valuation. Human worth is not something money adds later, and Dorian's forgiveness did not mean pretending those years had been harmless. He remembered them. He even wrote them down. But eventually, the notebook stopped being protection and started becoming weight. Healing sometimes means keeping the lesson and releasing the evidence. You can remember what happened without living inside it. You can forgive someone without reopening the door. You can wish them growth without giving them access to your peace. That is not cruelty. That is maturity. Even Vanessa's apology did not require an immediate answer. Dorian did not punish her. He did not humiliate her. He simply turned the phone over. Some conversations belong to another day. Some never need to happen at all. Responsibility also means knowing when silence is no longer fear. There is a quiet that comes from shrinking, and there is a quiet that comes from being settled in who you are. At the beginning of Dorian's life with Vanessa, his silence often came from hoping she would finally choose him. By the end, his silence came from knowing he had already chosen himself. Those are not the same silence. So if you are building your life quietly right now, keep going. Not because one day everybody who doubted you will feel embarrassed. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. Keep going because your life deserves the work. Because the people who love you deserve the healed version of you. Because your gifts deserve somewhere honest to grow. And because the voice that once told you that you were not enough does not deserve permanent residence inside your head. Maybe there is a notebook in your life too. Not a real notebook. Maybe it is a memory, a sentence somebody said, a rejection, a betrayal, a moment you replay whenever you begin to believe in yourself. For a while, that memory may have helped you survive. It may have reminded you what not to return to. But there may come a day when you do not need it anymore. When the lesson can stay and the wound can finally leave. Dorian's most important act was not becoming a billionaire. It was recognizing that he no longer needed to prove he deserved love. That is a kind of wealth no headline can calculate. So let me ask you this. Could you have stayed calm through that toast? Would you have shown the receipts immediately? Or would you have let the room discover the truth on its own? There is no perfect answer. We all carry different histories. But whatever your answer is, remember what Odessa Whitaker taught from that old rocking chair. The people who talk the loudest about your failures may be speaking from fears you cannot see. You do not have to make those fears your identity. Build your life. Protect your dignity. Take responsibility for your own choices. Forgive when forgiveness helps you move forward. Set boundaries when boundaries are needed. And treat people with respect before you know what they own, who they married, or what headline might carry their name tomorrow. If this story moved you, share it with someone who is building quietly. Someone who needs to remember that being underestimated is not the same as being without value. And if you want more stories about dignity, consequences, second chances, quiet strength, and people who discover they no longer need the approval they once chased, subscribe and stay with us. The folded $20 bill was never really about money. The $1 billion valuation was never really about money either. The real story was a man learning the difference between proving people wrong and finally becoming free from the need to prove anything at all. Build quietly. Heal honestly. Love people who see you before the headline. And when an old chapter has taught you everything it can, let the door close.